Um, Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are joining us for the first time tonight? Oh, wow. You're very welcome here. We're the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction, and we do this through public events like this one, reading groups, writing workshops, and our emerging writing fellows, to name a few things. And I just want to say on behalf of the staff and our volunteers that we are wholeheartedly committed to supporting librarians, authors, publishers, booksellers, and readers when it comes to the freedom to read. A couple of First, I want to thank the Romanian Cultural Institute for connecting us to Liliana, who you'll see in a video. She is in Romania and she's taking part in a literary festival, so the time difference is going to be too rough for her to join us virtually, but you'll see her. A couple of housekeeping announcements. Our cafe and bar will be serving until 8:30. You might need a drink or a cup of tea after this, and I say this not to make light of the severity of what we are discussing here, but I mean that we need each other when we face issues like the ones you're about to hear about, so stick around and have some casual conversations after. We will also have an audience Q&A, and when it's time to go to questions, if you're here, if you would raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you. We have a lot of people who are watching on the live stream. That way they can hear you as well. And if you're watching on the live stream, you can type your questions in the chat at any time. And now for our panel, and I'm abbreviating the bios a bit for the sake of time. Kim Snyder is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work includes Us Kids, Newtown, Lessons from a School Shooting, Welcome to Shelbyville, and I Remember Me. She is currently developing a number of new projects, including The Librarians, a feature-length documentary about the unprecedented wave of book banning in the US, produced with PBS and slated for release next year. Liliana Corobca, I should have checked that. I'm sorry, Liliana, is a writer and researcher of communist censorship in Romania. She was born in the Republic of Moldova and is the author of the novel Negrissimo, winner of the Prometheus Prize for debut fiction. She's also the author of the novels The Censor's Notebook, which we'll talk about this evening. Erroll McDonald is a vice president and executive editor in the Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group at Penguin Random House. Among the many authors he has edited and published are James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Salman Rushdie, and Wole Soyinka, and there are many, many more. He also happens to be the chair of the board of directors here. Emily Drabinski is an associate professor at the Queens College School of Library and Information Studies. She edits Gender and Sexuality and Information Studies, a book series from the Library Juice Press, Lit Wind Books, and is a contributing writer for Truth Out. She currently serves as president of the American Library Association. And our moderator this evening, Jennifer Baker, is a publishing professional of 20 years, the creator and host of the Minorities in Publishing podcast, and editor of the short story anthology Everyday People, The Color of Life. She's volunteered with organizations such as We Need Diverse Books and I2 Arts Collective, and spoken widely on topics of inclusion, the craft of writing, podcasting, and the inner workings of the publishing industry. Her fiction, nonfiction, and criticism have appeared in various print and online publications. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh, you have to
Technically, you can.
turn.
How about me? Am I on?
I think I can hear
Testing, am I on?
It's always funny in the digital era when you're like, turn it on and turn it back off. That's how it'll work.
I was in a Zoom meeting today and we couldn't hear each other, and so each of us left and came back and it worked.
I think I'm good. Yeah, I have a loud laugh too. So.
But they need to hear you.
Can you hear me? Can the live stream hear me?
Okay, we're good.
All right. Thank you for bearing with everybody, and I'm really honored to be with this illustrious panel, and I put emphasis on the word illustrious here. As Melanie mentioned, it's a big topic, and we're not making light of it. And we want to talk about the seriousness of the issue, what's happening, how it's not just about book banning. This has been going on for eons, unfortunately. And also we want to talk about the wins and come away with things that we can do. So I think sometimes we feel a bit helpless. It's a lot, and those feelings are valid, and it just shows the community we're in that we're dealing with a lot, and that also we deserve that time to breathe, take care of ourselves, look after each other, and see what we can actually do to contribute. So this is why I'm really happy to be here today. So I want to start, we've seen and absorbed a snippet of Kim's wonderful documentary that we're really excited for, called The Librarians. And so I wanted to start with Kim because I'm interested in what you saw on the back end and why Granbury, that place in particular, in Texas, where we hear a lot is going on. So can you speak a little bit about how the production went and kind of, I guess, an arc of sorts?
Sure. Well, unlike my colleagues here, I'm sort of 2 years new into this subject as a documentarian. You delve into something and it's always a new world, and this was a new calling. But when I heard about the Krause list that you saw in the trailer, where a state senator in Texas had issued this list of 850 books, I was immediately intrigued. It was before it was sort of making its big rounds as an issue in the press. And I was particularly intrigued to hear about this group of librarians that was rising up in Texas to fight back. So my producing partner and I sort of immediately went down to Texas as an inception story. As you can see, the film is in progress. It'll take another year to be fully baked, probably, and out next year for hopefully lots of people to see. But what we have been able to observe on the ground, that's what I can sort of bring, is our observations of working on the ground in Texas over the last year and a half with a group of librarians through their network called the Freedom Fighters, these brave librarians who are under siege and organizing other librarians and in touch with the ALA and other great folks in the country to fight back. We have actually been in more than Granbury. We've been concentrating in 3 places. You see a character named Suzette Baker, who is the first very high-profile story. We met her literally at the Texas Librarian Association, just sort of post-COVID. We were just talking about it backstage, where we see, hundreds of librarians getting together for the first time since this unprecedented wave is launched. And we were struck by the collective trauma. It wasn't just this person, it was just an entire room full of people, librarians who were under siege and afraid on many levels, afraid for their personal safety and livelihoods, but also just incredibly dedicated to the idea of upholding intellectual freedom. So we really taken with all of that. Granbury was particularly important because the 60 books that were initially taken off the shelf, we bet on that town. It's a very conservative town with some very colorful characters. The librarian's story is flanked by students and concerned citizens who kind of range in the political spectrum, actually. So it's not just a partisan framing. And actually, Granbury has, the ACLU in Texas issued a warning letter, and they became the first town in America, if I'm not right, to be the subject of a national government Department of Education investigation of what's happening in Granbury. So we've been sort of digging deep in that town as a microcosm. Suzette in Llano, her story is a winning story. We were just talking about winning stories. She gets fired for refusing to take these books off the shelf. She's a military vet. And certain residents in her town decide to sue the council, the city council, and the judge who physically came and took the books off. And they don't sue for her wrongful termination. They sue for infringement of their First and 14th Amendment rights. And the case, while it's not resolved yet, it's been a great story in terms of we're watching and we're not going to, the shenanigans that you see, the workarounds of, well, we're just going to try to sell the land to the next county and get rid of the whole library. So it became this issue of, well, we don't need the library. So now we're talking about firing librarians, closing libraries. We see that story. And then we get to Keller, where we just see, what was the number I'm going to call it? Maybe out of, they reported already that 11 out of their 30 libraries, out of 44 had left. So we're looking at a story of attrition, of what does it mean if our librarians become obsolete. We were just having a conversation. The other questions that come up have to do with beyond the actual stories you see of books being banned. What does it mean when you hear the chilling effect of librarians who it's just not worth it, or are just so afraid now with new legislation, especially in Texas and elsewhere, that would criminalize librarians? They are truly terrified. And, and nobody can blame anybody for whatever actions they do or don't take, but we see that kind of reaction and chilling effect. So we're chronicling all that and then trying to, sort of tell this story. I always thought it's sort of like remaking Lord of the Rings. It's like there's the Force. I hate to dumb it down that way, but it really is this fire that is spreading, and then there are firefighters, and like the freedom fighters, and how their efforts are also proliferating. So it's and I'm really curious to hear what from the top down. I'm sort of looking at a lot of the stuff on the ground, the grassroots stuff.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And so coming to you, Emily, because that makes sense, right? Because you're the head of ALA. I also kind of want to illuminate something, because I don't know if everyone realizes how this happens, right? Like councils and, all those things.
Like how I'm the president?
No. Like,
Do you want information about the election process?
No. About specifically like how the books get banned.
Oh,
right? Because
sure.
I've spoken to parents and authors who are like, how did my book get banned? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's an insidious nature of collective ignorance that is relied on for people not to realize these things are being taken away. So I don't know if you can illuminate that a little bit, as well as like kind of respond to what ALA is seeing as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I think more people are thinking and talking about libraries right now than they have in the 20 some odd years that I've been a librarian, right? Like, mostly the news coverage has been, who needs a library with the internet, right? Like, and that's been the battle that we've been fighting. But right now you have a lot of people looking at libraries because of the organized censorship attempts that we're seeing. So what I love about libraries and why I work in them is that they are material places, and everything we talk is not theoretical. It's like the books get banned because someone comes in and challenges the book, and that's a very normal thing. And one of the things that I like to make clear is that we want the public to be engaged with the public library, and we want parents to be engaged with their school library. Like, this isn't a story about how too many people are asking questions. So we're very used to challenges, right? And every library has a challenge policy. So a form you fill out, and those forms have been changed in response to the sort of mass censorship attempts that we're seeing. So one of the things that librarians are adding to their policies is you must provide evidence that you have read the book.
Nice.
Right? And I saw a news item about an attempt to remove books from a shelf in a public library in Mobile, Alabama. And there wasn't a whole lot to the story, but it did say that the books were put back on the shelf because it was clear that they had not been read by the people who challenged them. So we'll have a process. You challenge the book, you fill out a form, it's reviewed by professional librarians, right? So book selections are not made by random people, and no more would I cut my own hair, which I did during the pandemic, and it was not cool, right? That, like, we don't presume to know how to cut hair or manage plumbing, or I didn't mic myself tonight, right? So librarians are professionals who are trained in collecting materials to support curriculum in schools, to support the public that use their library, and that public is different for every library, right? And so that group of trained professionals will review your challenge request and look at the book and make a decision. And so what we're seeing is two things that are different. One is that rather than a single parent being concerned about a single book, they're coming with the list, and we saw that in the clip. They're coming with a list of 500 books that we want you to remove from your collection. And then, they're coming in, and numbers just came out today from ALA. The number of unique titles that are collected is growing. Like the numbers are 20% higher than they were last year, when last year they were the highest in record, on record since we've been tracking for 20 years. So that's different. And then second, if you have a board of the library that is hostile to libraries, right? So if the library board or the school board is hostile to libraries and hostile to reading and hostile to independent, free, sovereign control of our own minds, right? They will sometimes ask, like the board can decide to remove books from the collection. So,
And those are elected?
it again, every library is unique. Okay. There's a project right now called Libraries to the People that you can Google, and they're trying to come up with a database of like every single public library board in the country and how but sometimes they're appointed, sometimes they're county-based, sometimes they're elected, like all of them are different. Okay. But taking the time to learn about your public library and who's on the board of that public library, could you be on the board of that public library?
Maybe.
Like it is a call for those of us who care about public institutions and care about public life to look at those public institutions and see if there are ways that we can be the people who make some of the decisions, right? We need more people who believe in the library to be in positions of authority, I think.
Thank you so much for that. I think like that was helpful, right?
Was that helpful?
Yeah, I see many nods.
A little bit of the technique, yeah. And I can say more about what ALA does, but I don't want to take up all the time.
Oh, well, we're definitely get to that, but I do want to get to Erroll because, of your esteemed career in book publishing, and book publishing is very much at the center of this as well. So I'd love to hear more of your experiences and even thoughts to what we've been saying and what we saw in that clip from the publisher's angle or the author's angle of, are there partnerships that are happening, or in general, into your thoughts of where we're at and what can be done, especially in spaces like from authors, from publishers, how do we collaborate?
Okay, well, the presumption is that we collaborate. Because, we've been talking about the public sphere so far. With publishing, we're talking about a capitalist arena. Okay? And so, book banning is complicated for publishers. Any publisher who tells you that we don't want any books being banned is lying to you, if only because book banning has become willy-nilly a marketing strategy, a marketing tool. And by that I mean, it's not a marketing tool for all books. It's a marketing tool for books you have heard about but have not read. So that in this book banning outrage, the books that have benefited commercially best are books like Mouse, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, Toni Morrison's Beloved, Tony's The Bluest Eye. So there is an ambivalence there. There is a complication there, partly because I think both spheres, the capitalist arena and the public sphere, are bedeviled by certain collective anxieties, okay? I mean, I think that one of the most important things that we can do is to identify why it is that people are obsessed with banning books, and what are the subjects that inform these bans, and they tend to be books that have to do with race, they tend to be books that have to do with LGBTQ, they tend to be books that have to do with violence and abuse, et cetera, et cetera. But what I've noticed is that publishers themselves, even as book banning has taken off, publishers themselves are now engaged in their own form of censorship. And this is censorship that goes by the name, for instance, of sensitivity reads, where ideological decisions are being made about what should be published and what should not be published, what language can be used and what language cannot be used. So, you know, publishers are mindful of the need for free expression, but they're also mindful of the need to make some cash money. And that ambivalence, I'm afraid, is not what one might want to hear, but nonetheless, it is what it is.
I appreciate that capitalism has entered the chat. Because it needs to. It does need to. To Errol's point of, you know, the reasoning for it, when we look at the overall history of books being banned, and like due to churches in Europe in back in the day, and under usually 3 categories, right? Religion, morality, and politics, critiquing spaces. And even the quote from, what is it? Because I wrote it down. There's this great book called Books on Fire by Lucien Palestin that came out in 2007. And it quotes, "An educated people cannot be governed." And I feel like that kind of touches on your clip, right, Kim? Of monetizing in some ways, but also monitoring and taking away free thought, just like Ibram said, right? And so this has been going on for eons. And I'm going to be a bit repetitive about this because I do realize that there's a difference in what we've seen. I mean, I was born in the 80s, so like, I get it. And that this has been proliferate for eons, that cultures have been taken, languages have been lost because things have been burned, because people have been killed. And so it's also tied to many things like Comstock, right? Like the Comstock Law, 1873, and how that's recirculating because there was the need to remove obscenity. And what's obscenity? What's indoctrination? And part of a Comstock is being resurfaced because of the fact that there's also reproductive rights that are involved in that. It's not just books and information, it's actual ways to prevent pregnancy that are being, and that's resurfacing in discussion. So that's how it kind of spreads, right? And it all collectively comes together in, well, what's happening, how are we seeing it proliferate, what do we do, the importance of this documentary, the importance of the ALA, the importance of realizing where publishers stand and how it's complicated in all those ways too.
I think it's why it's really crucial that we take the sort of book banning story and connect it to broader political problems and broader political movements. Because if we continue to define the censorship problem as a problem of the book, right, then the answer is keep the book. And I don't see how any of us could be satisfied with that as a solution to what the book banning problem is really, you know, about, right? It's that, because they're not attacking books that I might ban that are like too long or like based on a movie, you know, like stuff like that. Like, they're about fishing and I don't like fishing. Like they're banning books that are about people that they don't want to exist, right? I think we have to be super clear about that. And they're using that in the story of Lano, I think is a good example of this, that it's not, like, it's also about wanting to shutter some of the last remaining public institutions that are still sort of hobbling along in this country, right? So
and accessible, right?
Yeah, and accessible to everybody and open to everyone. Like there isn't another institution where you can go in, sit down, have a drink of water, maybe use the bathroom and sit undisturbed and maybe log on to the internet, right? Like all of the things that libraries do that are not about reading the book, but are just about facilitating a kind of cross-class space in public life for people. So it can't just be about the book. It has to be about like figuring out what the anxieties are, you know, and responding to those. But I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't think about them in the connected to a broader set of political concerns.
I'd like to ask a question, which is, and I'm going to connect it to broader social concerns. Why is it that the overwhelming majority of people you see on TV insisting on banning books are white?
It's a total coincidence.
No,
Well,
I'm just not watching the right shows.
yeah, I was gonna bring up to your point, Emily, about the broader context. One of the challenges of making a documentary about this, because I think of it like an octopus, you not only have to understand so many things about who and how do we define obscenity when they claim there's obscenity. How do books get banned? How is the protocol? I mean, what we see on the ground is all the protocol has been broken. There were always parental rights. So without understanding this whole new wedge issue thing of using parental rights and the right, to your point, claiming those words, parental rights, when we talk to, in one town, a group of Black moms who've got kids in a reading group, and why do they get to claim this this term parental rights? What about the parental rights not to have books like these taken off the shelf, and our kids asking why are they taking those books?
Right.
So it's so complicated in terms of it becoming a political football, which I think is the context of history and fascism.
Right.
One of the ironies of books that are being banned today, within the publishing context, is that a lot of these are books that publishers for years refused to publish. Okay, books about Black people, books about people of color, books about gender, et cetera, et cetera. It is only recently, relatively recently, in the history of American publishing that these topics are being considered by publishers as money-making ventures, let's put it frankly, okay? But a lot of these books the irony is that a lot of these books that are being published, that are being banned, publishers would not have touched 20 years ago.
Yeah, right. There's so many ways to ban a book.
Right.
And one way is to not publish
One
it.
way is just not to publish it.
It's all circuitous.
So it might be a mistake to see this issue in black and white terms, no pun intended. It's not as simple as that. Publishers have not always been champions of freedom of expression.
It is hard in our observation on the ground in Texas not to see this in the larger context of white Christian nationalism that is just terrified of anything that would be rewriting history. So books like Stamped, or any number of things or anything that would acknowledge same-sex marriage, anything in that realm. Those are the books that are rewriting the history that we're living.
I feel like I'm in church. I like it. I dig this. I really like it. We are going to pause in a way because we want to bring Liliana into this, who couldn't be here today. I do want to acknowledge Liliana's book, The Censor's Notebook, a novel that was translated by Monica Cure and is being published by Seven Stories Press. And I believe Liliana will be here in November, here literally at the Center for Fiction for an event, so please be on the lookout for that. And we're going to hear a little bit from Liliana.
The first major action of censorship was a purge of books. And the main institution of censorship who did this in the Soviet Union was Glavlit, and in Romania was the General or main department for press and publication, exercises the most important and the largest operation of censorship. An army of censors was actually in charge of the whole process of banning, discovering of anti-Soviet authors and harmful works. Thousands of authors and millions of books, including national and international classics, were declared enemies of the new regime and banned. In 2010, I edited a volume of document about the ban process of the books. which included 130 documents, and it's hard to summarize, but let's speak about criteria. The first ban criteria were in 1922 in Russia. A. Publications containing agitation against Soviet power. B. Disclosing the state secrets. C. Disturbing the public opinion by communicating false informations. And D. The pornographic nature. In the 1945-1950, in Romania and in the communist bloc countries, the first ban criteria were the fascist, Nazi, chauvinists, racist character of publications. In the short time, the criteria have multiplied, reaching sometimes the absurd. The books were banned or destroyed because they contained sympathies to the West, idealistic philosophy, pessimism, unhealthy love, which aims incitement of the senses, books that do not evoke with enough enthusiasm the achievements of socialism. After this stage, the lists with book removed will reflect the evolution of political life. After the Stalin's death, the books about the cult of personality will disappear. Writers or scholars who flee the country and choose exile also disappear. Usually the orders and criteria were confused. In many localities, the libraries have been destroyed without taking into account any lists or any criteria. Arlen Bloom, one of the best specialists in Soviet censorship, state in a volume about the forbidden books in Soviet Union that the politics of total bibliocide led to devastation of the book found so far unknown in history, and the result of it was an essential diminution of the spiritual and intellectual potential of the country. What can we say in general more about the impact of censorship on writers and on their works? The effect of censorship was complex and different from one period to another. The first reaction was fair and self-censorship. In the first period, the repressive censorship was the most active, with dozens of authors arrested or killed, millions of books burned or hidden in secret, inaccessible funds. When the situation changed, the power lured the writers, seeing in them tools of propaganda. Fortunately, art and freedom are closer concepts than art and power. By definition, literature is difficult to submit to constraints, rules, prescriptions. The history of censorship proves that constraints can stimulate the creative act. Aesopian writing appears, the writer invents new methods to tell the readers what he has to say. The banned books became more desirable. It sells better, and the impact of bans is the opposite of what was expected. So on this optimistic note, I will finish my short 5 minutes speech about censorship. I thank you for the attention and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Liliana. So Liliana kind of hit on points that we've all said, right? Like the criteria, this being bigger than what it is, and also the book banning thing. And so I kind of want to start with Erroll on that, because she had kind of started with this optimistic note of book banning sold more.
Certain books.
And you mentioned that, but there's, to your point, there's hundreds, if not thousands of, if not hundreds of thousands, or tens of thousands books being banned. And I'm curious as to any thoughts you have in terms of like a way to combat that in sense of also contributing to what Liliana said of authors finding new ways to be able to express themselves, even if it's not maybe quote unquote constrained to the book itself.
Well, like all politics, book banning is local. I mean, there's a reason why certain states seem to excel in the practice. States such as Texas or Florida or Utah or South Carolina. So, to the degree that legislation is being passed on a local level, it behooves all of us as citizens of particular communities to get involved in those communities and find out what's going on, okay? And addressing issues that arise locally, specifically where you live. And that seems to me the way to engage this issue in an effective manner.
Okay. Kim, can you speak a little bit more about Freedom Reads, freedom with the A instead
Freedom
of two
Fighters.
E's, or freedom, right?
The freedom fighters.
Freedom Fighters, yes, thank you.
Well, I think, there are specific librarians who started this hashtag, and much to their surprise, it really caught on and they had an enormous reaction. But I think their efforts have spawned efforts elsewhere in Florida who are not specifically affiliated, but it's a network. Mm-hmm. And probably Emily could speak even better to that. But in Florida, it's Freedom to Read, that group, and they're springing up. And librarians are finding a way to organize, often under the umbrella of the ALA, which might segue into how shocking it was for us on the ground. We went to the Texas, the TLA, Texas Librarian Association, for 2 years in a row. And that first year, we started to say to see during that conference how the name of the ALA was starting to be co-opted as, almost like you were saying, George Soros or something like that. So there was this idea of organizing, and anybody who was organizing within that was sort of on that side of things. So we saw that, but I was going to say something in reaction to what you were just saying about, so I thought I just had that.
The locality of it, or
just about the local thing. Just how something that's been in my head a lot is we've been on the ground in Texas, but obviously this is something that we read about. I think it's a very confusing issue for the public. Maybe, and I'm not criticizing the way the media is handling it, and it's why we're tackling it as a long-form documentary. But I think what happens is, even when I go to certain circles of people here in places like New York who are self-ascribed liberals, there's a conflating of a lot of issues that I think is very purposeful from the political parties that intend it to be used that way, of kind of it's segueing quickly from book banning to pronouns in classrooms to curriculum. Like, there's a lot of confusion for, I think, a lot of people, even who are liberals, saying, I don't really know how to get my head around this. And I think that is very purposeful, and it might be that the first thought here in New York is, well, we're New York and we're in a bubble and it's not Texas. But there are things happening here.
Ask the school librarians in New York City public schools, and they will tell you this is not something that happens elsewhere.
Right, and so it feels like to me, it feels like a cancer that's metastasized. And that's why in every community there needs to be concern.
And so, Emily, I want to get.
Can I tell you a quick story about Romania?
Yeah.
It's going to be really short.
Yeah. And then can you tell us about the ALA?
Then I'll tell you about the ALA. So I was at the International Federation of Library Associations conference in Rotterdam earlier this, who knows about time, sometime recently. And there was a poster presentation from a librarian in Romania. And the project that they were doing at their public library, they took women who had deep knowledge of the heritage of a particular kind of embroidery that is done on blouses for sort of like, this is the sort of heritage dress of Romanians. They connected them with younger people who didn't know the heritage weaving piece but did know coding. And the two of them would meet, talk about the embroidery pattern, and the librarian would develop the code for that so that it could be preserved in the library and the heritage clothing could be made accessible to everyone. And then the two people would, the partners would embroider the shirts together and wear them and have a little event. And so I want to tell that story because I think the attacks are not just on books, but they're also on libraries. And that's the kind of work that your public libraries are doing all over the world. And it's worth preserving. Yeah, it was beautiful. And the book is gorgeous. If you haven't read Liliana's book, it's really sort of hypnotizing. Sort of, you see the way that the censor begins to sort of descend into a kind of paranoia where language no longer has any kind of legible meaning. It's a good novel.
Yeah. So, has anybody else been to Romania? No one else has been to Romania?
Oh, I have, but that's way too long.
Okay, that's a long story.
My friend already heard about it for half an hour on the way here.
But the ALA, if you get a little bit more into like what is going on at the ALA, and also there's some great resources that we can support with, like your website has a lot of wonderful things too.
The website is full of things. So the ALA is the largest and oldest library association in the world. We've been around we're coming up on our 150th anniversary. And I think among all the amazing things that ALA does, it convenes library workers together to solve crucial problems in the field. And that's everything from how do we deal with interlibrary loan once it moves out of the pneumatic tube era, right? To, what kind of cataloging tools are we going to use to make materials accessible to our patrons, and how do we change language so that it's more accessible? And then we address big problems in the field like this one, where library workers are the people who are every day the bulwark against this kind of attack. And so we convene people in lots of different ways, at conferences, at events, at webinars, to try to grapple with the problem, to try to understand it and its shape and its depth and its scope, and to try to figure out how we can fight back in the many, many, many ways that are, as Erroll said, highly local, right? What works in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York is different from what works in the neighborhood in Boise, Idaho, where I grew up. But we bring all the minds of library workers together to try to solve those problems. So I was asked to think of a call to action. One of the things that the ALA has done since 1970 is provide material support to library workers facing discrimination or employment issues based on their defense of intellectual freedom. It's called the Leroy C. Merritt Fund. You can Google it, but it is worth donating to. We have so many librarians who need a kind of cash grant to figure out a lawyer who can help defend them, who can bridge the sort of gap between being fired and being reinstated. And that kind of material support for library workers is something I'm really proud of.
Can you say the name of that fund again?
Leroy C. Merritt Fund.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So I want to ask others about any call to actions you had. Erroll, you mentioned getting involved local. I don't know if you wanted to tack on to that. Okay.
No, I mean, publishers should start publishing better books. Don't quote me on that.
Don't start tweeting that, y'all. Or Xing it. I don't know.
Lucky
what
my
it's called
phone's
anymore.
upstairs.
Kim, especially since you so close to folks for a couple years, and then you're gonna. correct me if I'm wrong, there's still more to come.
Yeah,
There's
we're
going
still
to be-
filming, we're editing. I was telling Emily, we're conceiving of a way to make this film not just informative, but dare I say, entertaining. I have had so much fun looking at a whole collection of clips in cinema, in our cinematic history, that deal with book banning. And what's crazy is you find these clips that are completely our footage now replicates the clip exactly. There's an old Betty Davis movie from 1956 called Storm Center, where it's just post-McCarthyism. They tell Betty Davis is the librarian in a small town, just
Can't
like
believe I
Leno.
haven't seen this. Okay.
You have seen it?
I haven't.
You have to see it. It's amazing. And she's told by this group of all-white city councilmen to take one of the Red Scare books off the shelf. She doesn't do it. She gets fired, just like Suzanne. And some stuff happens. The library burns, and it's a very dramatic thing at the end. They say, "We hope you don't leave and you help rebuild the library." And she says, I'm going to stay. And if it's the last thing I do, if anyone ever tries to take a book off the shelf, it'll be over my dead body. She says, so we're seeing Field of Dreams has an unbelievable school board scene that I had forgotten about, where just like in the trailer where you saw our wonderful beautician named Adrian calling that woman who wants to fire librarians and says, "You're a fascist, you're trying." There's this scene in Field of Dreams where it's the exact same thing. The wife playing Kevin Costner's wife in the movie gets up and says, "You're trying to get librarians fascist. You're a Nazi cow," or something. So we're having a lot of fun thinking about references in real history, but in our old cultural iconic history. So anyway, we're hoping that it'll get out there and be something that people will take in, learn a lot. It's just so much fun to geek out on, because I didn't know anything, and now I'm learning about things like the Miller test. And again, librarians as professionals, and what are their roles? So many people, you just like, I don't know what librarians even do. I don't know how they get hired. I don't know how they get fired. So it's a lot of fun and to add. There's another great clip from the Twilight Zone where librarians are being rendered obsolete, and so that's a question. It's like, what does it mean if the whole profession of librarianship becomes obsolete? What does that mean for us?
Yeah.
Yeah. This conversation provokes a recommendation on my part. There's a short story by Borges called Library of Babel. I would suggest that in the wake of this conversation, you should, all of you, read that story and imagine how increasing technology informs and reforms our imagination of the library.
That's your call to action.
That's my call to action. Go out and read the book.
Yeah, and the publishers, which we're not going to tweet about right now. This phase. So I just want to kind of try to sum up, because I want to open it up to questions, and we're probably going to do that awkward thing where I say, "Does anyone have a question?" and then we stare at each other for like 90 seconds. Cool. All right. So I want to sum up, that libraries work differently by state, but that folks can't come into libraries and challenge things. That libraries have boards, and we can look into how we can become more involved. Librarians are super important. Libraries are super important. I feel like libraries are archivists, very important archivists, among other wonderful things that librarians do. Kim is still working on the librarians, and we're going to see more from that. Erroll said publishers need to publish better books.
Which will the
And other
corollary-
things, and other things.
The corollary is that you have to start buying better books.
And you have to start buying better books. And recommendation of Library of Babel by Borges. And then there is the Leroy Seed
Merit Fund.
Merit Fund, or ALA, if you can support folks in that way. That is super helpful. I'm also going to recommend guides.library.harvard.edu, which has a really great banned books page. for you to look up. And then there's a great site, librariesforthepeople.org. It has this action graphic, and I shared it, and it's been reposted 500 times. I didn't even realize that. But as soon as I said, there's a graphic that you can share that tells 10 ways to help a library, people love infographics, so let's do that. We love those things.
And maybe Freedom Fighters t-shirts.
Yeah, Freedom Fighters too. Because they have a website, right?
I think so. There's been I've seen some great swag.
Every shirt in my collection now is a pro-library shirt. Yeah, I live in fundraiser t-shirts.
Yay, so fundraiser t-shirts. And Freedom Fighters, so it's FREADOM Fighters. So freedom.
What is, Emily, you must see every slogan out there. I saw, the one I've been loving is live your life like it's a banned book. Is that the one? Something.
Oh, that's good. I saw a sticker from, I think it's Greedy Reads, a bookstore in Baltimore, that says, banning books is bananas, and it's like a little banana. I really like that. Bananas. But the one we're using for Banned Books Week this year, which I think is really right, is Let Freedom Read.
Oh, I love
Let
that.
freedom read.
Yeah.
That's good.
Because I think one of the, we can't let them take the word freedom. And, we've got to take it back, and we all deserve it, and all of our kids deserve it, and the freedom to read matters to all of us, yeah.
I keep envisioning at some point when our film comes out and there's some call to action that there could be, and maybe this is happening already, but I've been involved in films about the gun violence movement. Of course, walkouts was the big thing, walkout. But I keep envisioning something where you would call for read-ins.
Yeah.
Where
I
kids
think
are just stop and, how can you get on kids for just
Sitting down and reading.
Yeah, just sit down and read a banned book.
I do think one of the best things that people can do is use your library. Go to the library, bring a friend, take your friend to the library, use the library, because these are public institutions. We use them or we lose them, and now's the time to go to the library, get a card.
And pay attention to the funding, because our mayor is, I don't need to say it.
I cannot speak on partisan issues.
I don't need to say it. It's great. Yeah, that was sarcasm in regards to him. So in that time, have you come up with any questions? Oh yeah, in the corner here.
It's a question based on something. Oh, thank you, I appreciate it. It's a question based on something Kim had said. You were talking about certain legal actions that had been filed, I think in Texas, you were talking about, related to the book banning. I was curious if you know what the history of legal actions regarding book banning are. It's not something I've come across. I'm curious.
Well, we've been following one particular bill. Janique, my producing partner, is my real brain, but it's HB 900.
HB 900.
That's right, in Texas. And I would defer to my expert colleague here in terms of across the country. So HB 900 is a bill that does involve criminalization of librarians for pornography under the, I think one of the, I keep using this word shenanigans that I never use, but one of the things is sort of the loopholes of, well, we'll go at it through a different way, which is state law governing on the books pornography, and a way to just say, well, this has been there, this is not new. We can criminalize someone for distributing pornography. So suddenly our wonderful librarians become pornographers and distributors of porn and obscenity.
So can I ask for clarification of, it's very open-ended, that word, in terms of HB 90, what is considered?
Well, that's where, you get into, hopefully, that you need to learn that there are criterion, and librarians study something called the Miller test, which has prongs that constitute. I think one of the things we've gotten on and is that what we're seeing in Texas in so many places is the breaking of protocol. Like, these rights were always there was a protocol, but now you see that the reviewers, which were trained librarians by boards, are being replaced by the, mom down the street.
I think there was a piece of legislation in Utah that didn't pass that would have required parental review of all materials, as if parents have some special insight into what kids should be reading. And Yeah.
So basically, you can then, in a certain, one of the prongs has to do with community standards.
Which is not to say that parents don't matter. I don't want to clarify, because I was just like, parents have some special expertise, and of course they do have special expertise in parenting their own children. But in building library collections for a broad public, that is a different expertise.
And to the point where Adrian says, you don't get to say what my kid can read.
Oh, yeah.
You can say what your kid can read, but you don't get to dictate that for the entire community. And that's what we're seeing happening is like, well, we're conservative here. We get to say what anyone can read, and we get to define what is obscenity. So if anything with an LGBTQ plus character, we decide that's obscene, that's what we determine in this community doesn't fly. So that's what they're fighting. I don't know with HB 900 elsewhere in the country, how draconian that particular bill is and how that's being replicated elsewhere.
There was a bill in the Idaho legislature last year that incredible organizing by the Idaho Library Association and supporters and booksellers in the state were able to push back that would have charged $1,500 or something, I forget the number, if a librarian was caught distributing inappropriate material to minors. And it passed in the legislature and vetoed by the governor because it was like on the grounds that it would be too expensive to enforce such a law, right? Which is, that's whatever. And then it wasn't, and then it failed they failed to overturn the veto by a single vote. So I think you've got lots of cases like that where there's like a draconian law that comes close to being passed, and then the next legislative session, another one comes, they try another one, they try another way.
But we're finding also that even when the bill doesn't pass, this idea of the chilling effect is not just on the shelves of books, it's what the threat of that kind of bill is. So we have one character, so many of these are rosy good stories, or not so many, some, but there's also stories where you see a librarian start out one way and just be broken.
Oh, it's
and
very hard.
Every day, and they're more common, I would say.
Oh,
where you feel for them. They want to be fighting, and at a certain point, it's like, well, maybe we need to be advocating more for informing librarians on what to do if they are attacked and sort of retreat.
One of the bludgeons being used in a lot of places right now is me. Right? The president of the American Library Association, who's an out lesbian, and I've been open about my political viewpoints, and that, and I'm like, I have, like, it's not happening to me because it's like happening to an internet version of me, but even I'm like, why would I keep doing this? Why would I not just quit, right? Like and I don't know, I've been to a ton of therapy, I've got good friends, and like I've got all of the things, and these aren't, the people who are attacking me aren't people in my communities, which makes it really different, because you've got librarians where the person attacking them is somebody that they went to high school with, right? Or a pastor at their church, or someone they know from the community, and
And they're also going around the supports around them. There are certain things that will influence how principals get hired and fired. And you'll hear these librarians collecting and saying, well, we always had principals standing behind us, but if they're going to be thrown under the bus. So there's all kinds of circuitous ways to go at breaking them that are really equally scary that we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It reminds me of sort of in Romania, the snitching factor.
Hi. So some of what y'all are talking about is about the discourse being so centered around what's appropriate for children to read. I'm someone who's mostly in the children's book space, and I was wondering what the conversation is happening as far as like where public libraries where you're talking about books for adults in the adult section that are also getting targeted. I wonder if you can speak to how this kind of is filtering to the adult space.
It's interesting. So the numbers that came out from the ALA today indicate a real shift in the challenges. So they've mostly been like in schools, like a lot in schools, but the number in public libraries is increasing dramatically. I'm actually not aware of book banning happening for adults. Do you know of stories like that? You do.
Yeah, of
So-
curriculums. I know curriculums have
Yeah.
been stripping those things from syllabi
But
at colleges.
But I think there's like the general attack on LGBTQ, Black, and people of color, like, period, right? And then on the books that represent them, it's encompassing.
Well, Suzette's library is a public library. It's not a
Yeah.
school library. So she is literally told to take How to Be an Anti-Racist off the shelf, the history of the KKK, and she said, I won't do it. And she gets fired for that. So,
So it is in the adult space.
yes.
Yeah.
And then there's things happening in the adult space libraries, like something that was concerning for me was in her library that anything that would be with a queer character has to go in a section with a rainbow. It reminded me of like, it's like, so some, kid who's kind of afraid and has to sort of out themselves in their conservative community by going to the rainbow section and having a book that is labeled that way. So there's those kinds of things happening. And I did want to ask you your opinion about what's going on in the whole space of the potential ratings. These bills that are calling on
Publishers to rate their materials.
to a rating system.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, I find patently preposterous. I don't even know how a publisher would be able to undertake that with any degree with anything but bad faith. So I don't, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to because I don't think ultimately it will really get off the ground. But it is something to be concerned about, obviously.
It's a real issue for electronic resources in libraries.
yeah.
The database publishers are really active in fighting against the censorship stuff because it's kind of impossible. So you'll have restrictions on materials for children, like don't circulate these things. But if electronic resources are contracted at the state level, really kind of boring shop talk conversation. But if they're contracted at the state level for higher ed and K-12, and it bakes in the restrictions that are based around children, but it ends up limiting access for adult learners. You've got rules that govern the community college because the community college sometimes has high school students in it. And so, yeah, it's a real...
One larger social issue that we might want to connect this issue to is how technology has engendered the collapse of any kind of common culture. Because nowadays, all of us are interested in our own personal playlists. So when you translate that to communities, they're concerned about what books we want to read as opposed to what you might want to read. And that very introduction of the notion that you can create your own culture is something that we didn't see before the Apple iPod.
And I was curious, Emily, when you hear folks like representatives of Moms for Liberty saying, we have to get this obscene stuff off of the second grade shelves. Is that just, what do you say to people? Is that just fake news? Because there have been moments where I think, well, I have to do my research. Is there one place in the country that had such, I haven't heard it. I haven't heard it from my librarians.
And this is why, librarians make collection development decisions that are appropriate for their communities. They're trained to do that. No librarian is stocking the second grade shelf with inappropriate materials. Do people make mistakes? Do books get put cataloged incorrectly? Sure, absolutely. It's a human project, but so when I hear you say do your own research, I'm like, stop doing your own research. Let's go back to trusting people who have expertise to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
Not
As a
to say that.
documentarian, I meant am I just being remiss in
No,
the,
yeah.
And just so
I don't think so.
we have time for one more question. Okay, maybe we don't. Okay, so when.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to hear about, the ways in which this is part of sort of the broader culture war, because I feel like it's a little bit sort of going around and about it. And like, I guess my question then is like, to what extent, like in so many other fights that are happening in terms of the culture war, it's not like individual parents, oh, it's amazing, it just organically happened. Individual parents across the country in all these different, places suddenly decided they were worried about,
Right.
the same books. Bizarre, right? So who are you seeing is sort of spearhead, is it sort of that phenomenon of the same people are spearheading these campaigns? And also just like, how are you seeing this as connected to larger, other aspects of the culture war that's happening today?
Well, I think the terror that white ethno-Christians feel, given certain demographic inevitabilities, is something that provokes this. And it doesn't matter, the we will not be replaced ideology is what ultimately is fueling this, I think.
Yes, and there's some real threats and fear related to violence, as we saw on January 6th. So you have in Texas, like one oil billionaire of that ilk who made it his business to make sure that 9 school boards in that part of Texas were stacked. And you have, school boards, they're different everywhere, but they're not paid positions. And so you have people who were on the right side of this, who are having dead animals put on their doorstep, and at a certain point where their families attacked online with real threats. They're sort of like, I'm out. So you have this intimidation and threats of school boards being replaced by pretty scary people. I mean, in Granbury, we'll just tell you the anecdote. I mean, if it weren't, it's so absurd that in a graphic novel it might be funny, but one of our she's not one of our characters, but a school board member who did replace someone else last month was caught in her new position at night with a flashlight with her friend, sneaking into the library to find the bad books. Then they had a meeting about potentially censoring her, and her friend, when they were caught, hid under a desk. Like, you just can't make this stuff up, and that's what's happening in places like that. These wars are being fought out. I always say, if you want to know what's happening, in America, you have to go to a school board meeting in one of these places because you just can't believe it.
In Louisiana, it's called, I think, however many parishes there are, the 57 Parish Project, and they're trying to go parish by parish, taking over the school board and the boards of control of the library, and those are well-funded efforts.
And we're afraid in parking lots of school board meetings like that. We are, or in Airbnbs.
Yeah. Shouts to my fighters in New Orleans, in the Louisiana, just the North Shore of New Orleans. They're doing amazing work. North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for those watching. And especially thank you to these three, because amazing. And Liliana, who couldn't be here. So thank you so much, Emily, Erroll, and Kim, for all the insight. And I believe Emily's going to shut us down.
We're going to put a couple of QR codes up here for two different things that the ALA does. One is the fund that Emily talked about, and the other is the arm that the Freedom to Read Foundation, which litigates against big book bans. Thank you all so much for coming. Please spread the word about all of this stuff, and stick around, grab a glass of wine, grab a tea, and we can continue the conversation. Thank you.
Pleasure.